Hello and welcome to my short video about the new TanStack React router. The TanStack React router has been released a couple of days ago. I think it was Christmas time. It was 24th of December 2023 when the project was released in its first stable 1.0 version. There are some interesting concepts and ideas inside this project, and I really like to show you some of them. In my project here, I prepared a little React application that is built with Vite, React and TypeScript, and the application is almost finished. The only thing that is left to do is to include the router so that we can route, that we can navigate through the application. And also there's some data fetching missing, and we will also add the data fetching because the TanStack router also supports data fetching strategies for your application. When you start a new application with the TanStack router, then you have to create a new router object here, and this router object will contain our routes, and you also have to add some TypeScript code here to make TypeScript aware of this router object and also aware of the routes that you have defined. We will see that TanStack router provides a Typesafe routing mechanism, so that means when you specify a route, for example in a link, then TypeScript checks if this route actually exists, if it's a valid route or not. That is very special about this router, and I really like this feature. We will see that in a minute. So we have our router, we have our TypeScript declaration. It's time to start with the first route, and the first route in TanStack router is always the root, the /root, and it's defined like this. New root, and we just specify a component here that must be a React component, and this component is rendered always when the root is active, and that is of course always the case when your application runs, because you cannot navigate aside of the root. So in our case, we return here a very simple component, a very simple React component. The only thing that we will do is to render a title, hello world for now, and also the outlet component from the TanStack router, and the outlet component embeds or includes all the components from the children routes. So if we, for example, have route called /a, then we would have a component for a, and this component would then be embedded here. In our case, we don't have a component for /a, but we have the so-called index route for our root, and the index route is the component that is rendered when this route is called, is invoked in your browser, and nothing else. So if exactly the /root is called in your browser, we have to specify the index route for /, and then we will add this children route to the root. And in our case, this is the landing page route, and this is a route in this case and not a root. And we specify the path, and we specify a component, and I already prepared this component with the landing page here. And we also have to specify what the parent root of this route is, and therefore we specify a function, and that returns in our case the root. So now when the router receives a request to /, then it will render the root and also our index route for this path. If we would request /a, and we would have a root definition for /a, then the root here would be rendered, and the root for the a would be embedded here. This is very comparable to how Remix or React router works currently. So now we have our first two routes. We have the layout route, the root, and we have the route for our landing page, the index route for our root. And to make them actually work, we have to create a route tree, and the route tree is built from the root and contains all the children of this root, and then later also the children of the children and the children of the children of the children, and so on. In our case, we only have the landing page route here, and we take this route tree here and add it to our router object. Everything else is already done. I have added the router context to the application component, nothing special, you can find it in the documentation. So I will save my application now and restart Vite, and we just open that in a browser. And here you can see our landing page, obviously, And if you have a closer look, we will also see the hello world here that we have added from the root. So this is the root here, and inside the root we have our landing page. That is this one here. I will now remove this hello world here because we don't need it. We just want to render now the outlet component, and I have some more pages prepared and we can just add them. Like for example, the about page root. It's also new root. And again, we have a path, and this is about. And of course, we need to specify the component, which is the about page in this case. And we again have to specify the parent root. And this is also the root. And I will add them to the root here. So this is the about page. When we're going back in our application, we see we have, again, of course, the landing page, but no hello world here anymore. If we add about here, our about page is shown. And the same thing we can do with the privacy page, also children of the root. So we specify the parent root here and add them also to the root here. Now we can also invoke the privacy root here, and we see our privacy page. What we do not have yet are links. When I'm here on the landing page, I want to click about us, and then the about root should be visible. If I click here now, nothing happens because it's not implemented. For that purpose, I'm going to the landing page, and here we have our buttons, for example, to about us and to the privacy page. And with the TanStack router, we specify the link, also specify the path. So we have a link to the /about root. And just for demonstration, I will make some mistake here. And now you see TypeScript complains here that this root does not exist. It's not assignable to type /about or /privacy. So TypeScript knows which roots we have here, and we can select them. We can be quite sure that we don't make a mistake here. The same thing are we going to do for the privacy page. Let's go back into our application, and now we can click on about us. I'm going back, going to privacy, and we saw the privacy page. Now I want to have a layout that is common to those two pages and also later to the actual application that we will add, but not to the global layout. So I want to have a page layout that matches for all the links that are beneath these features, but not for this top level landing page here. And the problem is now that these roots here do not have anything in common. We have /about, we have /privacy, we will have /receipts later on, but no common encaster, no common root where we could specify the common layout that should be used for this three roots. We can define something like a layout root that doesn't have a path, but it only has an ID. Otherwise, it looks quite similar to our roots that we have already defined. In my case, I will call this global page layout root, and it's root, and the root doesn't have a path like this one, but it has an ID. I call it static page layout for some reasons. And it also has a component like here. And the component is the global page layout. In this case, we will have a look into that component in a minute. And the parent here is the root. So we have defined our layout. It has an ID, but no path. That means it doesn't have a path or a part in the URL, in the part that you specify. It's invisible from the URL. Now our landing page and our about root should have as parent root the global page layout root. And in our root tree, we have as children the landing page, still the landing page, but here we have our global page layout root, and this root now takes this children here. Now when the path /about is invoked in the browser, is requested from the browser, the root will be rendered. It renders the outlet. And also the global page layout route, or this component, is rendered and is inserted here. And this component also needs an outlet to include then the component that should be rendered for the /about route. And the global page layout, you can see here, is just a React component. It renders the outlet with the actual page, in our case, about or privacy. Let's have a look how that looks in the browser. We see no white space here at the top. But if we click on the About Us page, we see some white space here. We will fill that with the navigation bar in a minute. And we also see this footer here. So now let's go back to our global page layout. We have the navigation that should be rendered here. And the navigation is just a collection of links in this case. It's very simple. Just another example how to use links. We will use the link to the About page, and we also will have a link to /privacy. I don't think that will look very bright, but at least we have some links here, and now we can navigate. We could also add a link to the /root home. And again, everything is type safe. If I enter something that does not exist, I get a compile error. Here the roots are correct now. We can navigate here around privacy, about, and home. The link component has several properties, and among others, it has an active props property, and that is a callback function that is invoked if this link is active, and then it can return the properties that should be applied to the actual link. And with this active props property, we can, for example, highlight the active root in this case. We could, for example, do something like that. We return a class name here and just make underline decoration, and maybe we can also do a bold font, and maybe we can red font so that we see this is actually active. So let's add this active prop also to the about route and also to the privacy route. Now when we go to About Us, you see it's red underlined because this is the active route that we have opened in our browser. And with privacy, it's the same thing. It's red because it's active. Great. That is basic routing. You have seen that we have this Typesafe routes. So we have a quite high safety that our links are actually working. Maybe we can just write the button here for this let me in, I'm hungry. And we just add the link to that. And we see a compile error here, but we don't care for now. And we just click on this button that where we have now a route that is not valid. We have seen the compile error, but we ignored it. So the link does not work. If I click on that link, we see just a white page because we have not specified how should the TanStack router handle routes that are not available in our application. We have no not found route, and that is a thing that we can define now and add a new not found route. And this is a specialization, or it's an own class that we have to instantiate. It's the not found route, and it just said it has a component. In our case, we're doing it very simple, page not found. And also we have to specify the parent route. And that is in our case the root route again. And the not found route is something special. It's not part of the root tree. We just added here as a second entry to the configuration object of our router. Now I save the application, go back in the browser and reload. And now we see it doesn't look very well, but we see we have our page not found route here. So now let's go back to our landing page. And actually I want to implement this receipts route here. For that I again need another layout, because when this route here is visible, then I want to display the global layout, this one here with our navigation bar, and also another layout that adds another header to all pages that are beneath this receipts route. So here we will create now the layout for all routes under the receipts path. Layout route is another route, and the path is receipts, and the component is the receipts page layout. I also prepared that. And the parent route is our global page layout route. So we have now a route for /receipts, and it is nested in the root / and it's nested in the global page layout route. And in this component here we have another outlet, and in that outlet we will nest the next route that I'm implementing here, and that is the actual list of the receipts, like this, const receipts, and I will export that because we need this in a minute. List page route is another route, and its path is the root path, and this path that we specify here is always relative to the parent route. Get parent route is the receipts layout route, and inside /receipts the index route is this component here. This route has a component, and that is the receipts list page. So now our global page layout route has a children receipts layout route, and this receipts layout route in turn has a children receipts list page layout. Let's go to the app, to the browser and see what happens. Just reload, and now when we click on the receipts route, we will see our receipts here, and we also see this header here, which comes from the receipt page layout component that we can have a look at. Here we have our layout route for the receipts path, and whenever URL or a path is requested that starts with /receipts, the layout route is rendered, and inside the layout route the children of this route, in this case this receipts list page, will be rendered. Receipts page layout has another outlet here, and we have this receipts header here, and the receipts header is this one here. So if we add more pages to our application that are beneath the path receipts, always this header is rendered, and also this header here is rendered, because that is the root header of our application. The next thing that I like to implement are the links to the receipt detail page. So if I click on a title here, the actual receipt should be displayed, and for that I need a route that takes a variable segment, and this variable segment should contain the ID of the receipt that should be displayed when the page is opened, so that we can specify, for example, a URL receipts /receipt1 or /receipts/receipt2 and so on. And this is called a dynamic route because we don't specify the whole path, but we say in this place there is a variable, a dynamic segment that can be set to anything at runtime. And we specify that like this. We define our page route as we have seen it already, but now the path contains a variable, and the name of the variable is receipt ID in this case. Parent route again is our common layout route, and the component that should be displayed is the receipt page in this case. And of course we have to add this route also to our layout route as a children. When we now go to the receipt list page, we have this receipt card here, and this receipt card has the title here. And we can actually use the link again here, navigate to receipts Now TypeScript complains here, and that is because TypeScript knows that this path here contains a variable segment, a dynamic segment, that is this one here. And TypeScript now knows that we have to specify a value for this variable path so that the link component then can actually build or render the complete link, not with the variable here, but with an actual value. And to specify this value, we can just say params, and then we specify receipt ID. You see TypeScript knows that the parameter here is called receipt ID, and in our case we use receipt.id. So now when we go back to our application, we can click on this titles here. I will just make it a little bit more appealing. So we say hover text orange 2 and also hover underline maybe, so that we can see a little bit better that this is something that we can click on. And if we click on this link now, we see that we see nothing, because in this case our route is rendered. I'll just go to the receipt page here. That is the route that is rendered that we specified in our router configuration. But as you can see, we have to implement that here. And the reason why I have not implemented that already is because I want to use this route to show you how the TanStack router can work with data loading. It has some loader things built in, and I want to show you that. And for this page, we need to do a request to our backend to read the receipt data from our backend, and the receipt data that we have to load, of course, is identified by our receipt ID in the URL. So let's implement that. We are going back to our router configuration, and inside a router configuration, we can specify a loader property, and the loader property specifies a function that returns a promise. And when this route is rendered, then the TanStack router invokes the loader function, loads the data, and then in our component we can access this loader data. We're using the loader property and specify an async function that should return the data. And to know which data we have to load, we of course need this ID here that is that we have only at runtime. And for that we can create a parameter here, and the parameter also is called params, and this contains all parameters from our path. In this case, it's the only one. It's the receipt ID. Again, TypeScript knows we have specified a path with this variable, and it knows that this params object here has this receipt ID. We can now use this receipt ID to load the data. Again, I have something prepared. This is just a fetch call that uses or that fetches the data from our backend and returns them here. And we return an object here. So now we have a loader function specified. If this route becomes active, TanStack router executes this loader, and in our component we can then access this data, in this case the object with the loaded receipt. Let's go back to receipt page, and we use the loader data here. And that is an interesting thing, I think, in TanStack query. We can use the root object, this one here, this here, to access the loader data. We can use the use loader hook from this specific route. And because we're using the use loader hook from this specific route, TypeScript and TanStack knows which loader data we want to access here. We can here just access the data that we have used or that we have loaded in our loader. And here we can use the already built component that is called receipt page content. And that is the actual component. That is a normal React component that just renders this object that we have received from our loader. Let's see if that works. As you see, it works. We have our detail page here. I go back to the home page, go back to our list, and we can click now through the receipts here. There's another interesting thing in this loader, and that is that TanStack query caches the data that we have loaded. When we go for the first time for root, data is loaded, is cached, our root is rendered. When we then later come back again to the same root, TanStack query takes this data from the cache, but automatically reloads all the data from the backend and then refreshes our UI if necessary. So for example, if I click now on this fish and chips here, then the data is loaded, is put to the cache. Our component here is rendered. I go back, and when I would now click again, the data comes from the cache, but in the background, TanStack router reads the data and would refresh the UI if the data somehow changes. Another thing is that we can also implement some preloading. We can, for example, say in our receipt card here, in our link that links from the list of the receipts to the actual receipt page, we can say this data should be preloaded. And the parameter here is intent. And now the data for this route is automatically loaded in the background when we go with the mouse or with the keyboard to this link here. For that, we are looking at the network tab here, and I reload the page. And when I go now with the mouse here, you see that the request has been made for the data for this route. So this is immediately available. And what you see now is also when I click on this link, that again the data is fetched. And that is because TanStack has had it already in the cache. This was the first request here. Then we go to the page, we get the data from the cache, but in the meantime, in the background, TanStack refetches the data to make sure we see the most updated UI. I think that is a very nice feature. This can be very helpful. And actually, we can inspect this a little bit better than with the network tab by using the developer tools that TanStack router provides. Let's go back to our root config here. And in our root, we add the TanStack router DevTools. And now we're going back to our application, maybe better to our list here. And we can open the TanStack router DevTools, and we see here the routes that are matched. The root, our layout here, and then the receipts layout, which is this one here, and then the actual page, the actual list here. And you see also we have some caches here, or we have some data in the cache. Probably or to make this a little bit more clear, I will open this here. You see, if I click, if I hover over a link, you see that the cache is populated due to our preloading feature. And let's jump into it. And now you see the active route here is the receipts number 14. It is visible since some seconds now. I think this is the time that the component is visible. That is the stale time for the cache data. It's 0, so it will be always refreshed. And 30 minutes is the cache time. After 30 minutes, it would be removed completely from the cache if no component is interested in the data anymore. When we click here on this link, on this route, we see the loader data here, which is very helpful. I think we can see the data that has been loaded from the from inside our loader. I think that's very helpful, and also some other informations about this router. So these DevTools are very helpful, I think. On this page here, I have a button here that should go back to the receipts list. That should be the back button. I just want to implement that. Here we have the backlink. One thing that I want to show you in this case is that we have seen that we can specify the routes here, and they are Typesafe. In this case, we want to go back to this route, but you can also use the route object itself. In this case, it's the receipts page route, and specify the 2 parameter here. It's the wrong one. It's receipt list page route 2. Now, no compile error here. So you don't have to specify or don't have to hard code your paths in your application, but you can just use this too. And if you refactor the paths, rename a path or something like that, your application still works and you don't have to go and do a search and replace, for example. I think this is also a very great feature that is very nice here. And by the way, you have seen I did this mistake that I specified the receipts page route here, which is this route here. And again, TypeScript complains because we have this link, but we don't specify the $receipt ID variable for this link. That's, again, we're here Typesafe. Let's fix this. And now we can go back here. We have seen routes, we have seen layouts, we have seen loader, we have seen not found, we have seen type safety, we have seen dynamic routes. There's one thing that I like to show you now, and that are the search parameters in a URL. You know, the search parameters are the parameters that you specify after the question mark in a URL, like for example, order by title and filter only the first 10 objects or something like that. And TanStack query makes it very, very easy and very, very safe to work with this query params. In fact, we can just think of the query params in React in TanStack query as a kind of application state for your application. It can replace in some cases probably the state or the global state from your application. If that will replace your state or not is a domain-specific question, I think. But in my case, I want to add a button or multiple buttons where you can that you can use to order this list here. And the actual order that you selected should be part of my URL so that I can, for example, copy the link and send it to someone else, and he or she gets the same list, the same order of receipts. And to do that, we have to work with the search parameters, or I will work with the search parameters, and that is a very powerful concept in TanStack query. And to work with search parameters, we have to specify how the search parameters for a route look like. And in our case, it's the receipt list page route that we want to invoke with search parameters. And the search parameters in TanStack query can be defined using the ZOD library, ZOD. That is a library that allows you to describe object structures like in TypeScript, but you're doing it at runtime in JavaScript code if you want so. And then ZOD generates you TypeScript types for that objects and can also validate at runtime objects and make sure that they match the expected structure of an object. Something that TypeScript cannot do because TypeScript is removed at runtime and ZOD is still available at runtime. And in this case, I want to have an object that looks like this. This Z comes from the ZOD library, and we define an object, and our object should contain a page property that is a number. And the number should have a minimum of 0, 0, 1, 2, 3 is valid, -1, -2, -3 is not valid. And the whole parameter is optional, can be left out. And also I want to have an order by property, and that is an enum that can either be the string time or the string rating. And overall, it can be undefined, it can be left out because it's optional. With this parameters, with this object, ZOD is able to validate an unknown object at runtime. And if the object that we validate matches this structure that we described here, everything is fine, and otherwise an error is raised. And we can use this in our route now to tell which search parameters we are working with in a route, so that TanStack query and also the TypeScript knows which search parameter a specific route deals with. And to do so, we add another property here that's called validate search. This is a function that receives the search parameter that are actually in our URL when the browser makes a request to our application. And we validate this object here to make sure the search parameters are matching our expectations. And when you're using ZOD, as we're doing it here, we can just use this object from Zot to parse this object, call the parse method and give the search parameter here. And what now happens is if this route, this receipt list route is invoked with or without search parameter, TanStack query creates an object, passes this object in our validate search function. And in our validate search function, we're using Zot to validate the object at runtime to see if it matches our expected search parameters. And in our component, we can now access and change the search parameters. And we can be sure that the search parameters are valid, because when they are not valid, I will show you that in a minute, we will receive an error here and we could handle then that error. But in our component, we can be sure we have search parameters that are page and or order by or nothing of them, because both are optional. And you can not only by the way, you can not only hear numbers and strings or enums, you can also use arrays and objects, and TanStack query will serialize these arrays and objects so that they can be part of your URL's search parameters. So now we defined the search parameters here. Let's actually use them. For that, we're going to our page. And in our page, we can use another hook from our route. In this case, it is the receipt list page route. And here we have a use search hook that returns the search parameter. By the way, nice TypeScript types here everywhere in TanStack router. Search params. So our component is rendered. We get the search parameters, and TypeScript knows how our search parameters look like. You see we have a page that is a number or undefined, and we have order by, and that is string or undefined. And if it does not match, we would receive an error somewhere else, not in our component. This is always a valid search object. This is always a valid search object that is returned here. So now we can use these search parameters to build some buttons that should allow us to reorder our page. And for that, I already prepared something like that. We have a check button here. I call it check button. And this check button should be checked when the search params order by is undefined. In that case, I don't want to have any special search order, and I will call this newest first. That is the button label. We also have two other buttons, and we have the order by cooking time, and we can also sort the receipts by rating. Let's go to our application. We see this button here that doesn't look actually correct right now. They will look correct in a minute. When we specify now here order by rating, for example, you see the page is rendered, and this page is rendered exactly the same as before because we haven't used the search parameter, not now. But if we specify, for example, rating 222, we receive an error now, because this search parameter does not match the expected search parameter object for this route, because we specified here rating 222, and rating is neither time nor rating nor undefined. So we receive this error here. The same would be true for the page. If we would specify page -1, it's too small, it's lower than 0, and we said you can leave out, you can skip the page parameter, but if you use the page parameter, then it must be greater or equal to 0. Okay, back to our page. We have to build a link here. We can just make the first step. Children. In this link here, we of course have to specify where we want to link to, and for that we have to specify the target of the link, and the target of the link is our receipt list page route. We have already seen this with this to parameter. And now we also have to specify the search parameters. In this case, we don't have to actually specify the search parameters because all search parameters here are optional, so an empty object is also fine. but we want to specify the search parameters, and we're doing this by specifying the search property. We can work with the search parameter in different ways, but one way is we specify a callback function, and that callback function receives the current search params from TanStack router and can return a new search param object, which will then be written to the URL. This is somehow like working with useState, where you have this callback function where you have the old state and then return a new state. It's very similar. And in my case, I just copy the current search params and then I update the order by property in my object, because that is what the link should do. Let's see if that works. We have the buttons here, and we have now the newest first. When we switch over now to order by cooking time, you see that the search parameter changed, but unfortunately our search does not change. And the problem here is that I do not forward the searching to our REST request that is made to our backend. So back to our receipt list page, we have here our search parameters. That is the TanStack query operation that receives the data from the backend. And I have to specify here page number and search params order by. So I think now it should work. Order by time. And now we see 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And also when we order by rating, I think then it's clear we have 5 stars, 5 stars, 5 stars, and so on. And here we have 4.5 star. So the order actually works here in this case. I think this is a very easy way to work with search parameters, and search parameters, as mentioned, can replace your state in some cases. And I think in this case, it would make sense, or it makes sense actually, to add them to the URL here. And we have this pagination here. We can just implement that exactly the same. We have already page button here. That is this one, and the only thing we have to do is to add the link here. And the idea is the same as before. We specify our to route, which is again the receipt list page route, and we make the same thing. We get the current search parameter, we make a copy of them, and then we add the page, and the page is here, the button.page. This pagination bar calculates which pages are available and what should be displayed, and so on and so on. And we just have to build the link here for an entry in this pagination bar. I have a current page parameter here that is set to 0. And of course that should be search params.page, the parameter from the page, or null. Now you see we are here. Page 1, it's 0 based, so actually it's page 2, and page 2 is highlighted, and we can click and go here, and we can resort everything, and we can go to a page, and I could copy this link, send it to someone, and then someone would see exactly the same list, given that there's no data changes in between. Okay, we have seen now that we can very easily work with this search parameters. Change the URL. We have updated the URL, and we actually can use this for parts of our state. If we use it as a replacement for state, I think it's a business decision. It's not a technical one. It's a business decision. Do I want to have this information, this order by information, in my URL or not? It can be good or can be bad. For example, maybe I have a button to change the theme. Dark to light, light to dark. Probably that was nothing that I want to have in the URL, but the search parameter maybe I want to have. And with this TanStack support for search parameters, we are very flexible in our application. And there's another cool thing, and this other cool thing I want to demonstrate you with this buttons here. And the idea of these buttons is that as a user, I can highlight some of the receipts, and whatever I do with this marked receipts, then they should the marked receipt should be added also as a search parameter, so that I can click on them and then I have a list of bookmarked receipts. And for that, I will add another search parameter to our root configuration of the receipt page list. And in this case, it's an array of strings, and the string can be, or the whole search parameter can be optional. So when we have not specified this search parameter, everything works, but I want to make it that if I click on this icon, the ID of this receipt should be added to the URL. And for that, I'm going to our receipt card. In our receipt card, we have already the bookmark button. The bookmark button is this one here. In this bookmark button, we have a decision: is this receipt, is this already bookmarked or not? And we also have to implement what should happen if I click on that link. And the first thing, if this is bookmarked or not, is an information that we can read from the search parameters. Search, nothing new here, but we will change this in a minute, and that will become really cool. And if this is bookmarked, is search params dot bookmarked receipt IDs dot includes the receipt ID. So bookmark receipt IDs is just a collection of IDs. And if our receipt ID is included in this list, then our button should be marked as bookmarked. We have a different styling based on the information whether this is bookmarked or not. The other thing is that when someone clicks on the button, on this bookmark button, then we have to toggle the information that this receipt is not bookmarked anymore, or it is now bookmarked if it wasn't before. And therefore we have to change the URL, of course. And now we don't want to implement that as a link, but actually, it's only a div here. It could also be a button, but it's not a link. That is the point. If you want to navigate from something to some other route, then you can either use a link, we have already seen that, or you can use the navigate function from use navigate. It's almost the same as in React Router. And now we can use the navigate function here, navigate to receipt list page route 2. We've seen that. And our search parameter, nothing new here, almost nothing new. We copy the old search parameters and we set our bookmarked receipt IDs to update bookmarks. So this function here just looks in this list if this list already contains this receipt ID, and also get the information if this receipt should be bookmarked or not, and then it updates the list, returns a new list, and we set the new list here to the search parameters. Nothing new here. That is exactly the same thing that we did on the route before, only some other syntax here, and we use navigate but not link. But there will be something different that I will show you in a minute. I will just make sure that everything works. So if we click now on this button here, you see it's added to the search parameter here. Also, it's displayed green. Let's add another one. We have now 2 here, and now we have 3. And we also can remove from the list here. Now the cool thing is that we can narrow down the things or the components that are re-rendered when the search parameter changes. And to show you that, I have added here some log informations in our bookmark button, and I will also add log to the receipt list page, log receipt list page rendered. So I use this console log here. We see that all bookmarks here are rendered, and if I add a bookmark, all receipt cards are re-rendered. You see here render receipt card 11, 3, 8, 9, and so on and so on. And we also see that the actual page is re-rendered. We see if I click on a button that the whole page re-renders. But we can limit the amount of re-rendered components because TanStack only renders those components that use search parameters that have actually changed. This is somehow similar to, for example, Redux, where in Redux you say, from the global store, I need information A and B, and only if this informations in the store have changed, then my component should be re-rendered. In TanStack Query, we don't use the Redux store, but we use our search parameters. We can specify a property here that selects those things from the search parameters that we use in our component, that we actually use. In our receipt list page, for example, we only use page and order by, but not the list of bookmark IDs. So we can, exactly the same as in Redux, we can specify a selector function here. That selector function gets the search parameters from the URL and can then return the search parameters that are needed in this component. And in this case, it's page, s.page, and it's order by, s.order by. And we don't specify the function here directly, but we give a configuration object, and that has a select function, and that looks like this. So now the receipt list page should only re-render when one of these search parameters change. I changed the sort order, and of course the receipt list page is re-rendered. Makes sense because the order can change now. Let's clear it again. And now we click on that button here, and you see that the bookmark button components, the 6 bookmark button components, 3 and 3, 6 bookmark button components that are re-rendered, but not the complete page. The bookmark buttons are re-rendered because in the bookmark button component we take the whole search parameters, and one has changed, so any of this button re-renders. But we can change also that behavior. So we go back to bookmark button, and here we access the whole search parameter object. But here again we can specify that select function, and in this case I use this expression here, is bookmarked, and now this component only re-renders when this bookmark now is included in the list or is not included in the list. I need here s.bookmarks receipt ID. In this case, when we go over this s here, you see that the type can be an empty object, or it can be our search parameter of this route. And the problem here in this case is that TanStack router knows we want to go to this page here, to this route, so we have to specify search parameter that looks like this, but the router does not know where are we coming from, on which route actually we are now, and that's why TanStack cannot make sure that this S is the search parameter of receipt list page route. Because if we would use the bookmark button somewhere else, then S would be something different. So to help TypeScript and to help TanStack router to interpret this S correctly, we not only have to say we want to go to this route, but we also have to specify from which route we want to navigate. And that is in this case the same route, receipt list page route full path. Now TanStack knows the search parameter that we got here are the search parameters from the from route that are our actual current search parameters, and the return value of this function should be the search parameters for the to route, which is in this case the same, but of course it could be another page. So now everything compiles here. I clean up here everything. And if we now click on one button, you see in the logging here, only this small button is re-rendered, nothing more and nothing less. So that is, it's some way comparable to Redux, very fine granular updates, but the updates are made by changing our URL here. I think this is a brilliant feature, that is quite a brilliant feature. And also what I really like is this explicit navigation from to, and then TypeScript and TanStack router knows everything it has to know to give us type safety here for building and working with the search parameters. That is very great feature. By the way, let's say this is a generic component and you use this in a couple of routes maybe, and you don't know what the from route is, you can skip that, but then you don't have you're losing the type safety, of course. But it would work if you have a generic component that maybe checks itself if it has the correct search parameters and then builds the new search parameters. That would work also, but of course then without type safety. Now let's go back again to our loaders. In our receipt page, we have this feedback column here, and the feedbacks are coming from a different endpoint. And I also want to add this feedback to our application or to our component here. But the problem is that the endpoint for the feedbacks is very slow. It takes a long time to load feedbacks. And because it takes a long time to load these feedbacks, I really like to make sure that the rest of this page is immediately displayed when this data is available. And until the feedback has been loaded, I want to see a loading spinner so that someone who wants to, for example, cook this recipe sees the most important data immediately. And when the feedback arrives later, he will see the feedbacks later, but he still can use or read the actual recipe as soon as possible. And for that, we can define in our loader function important data that we should wait for and deferred data that we don't want to wait for. In our router config, we have our receipt page route, and we're loading the receipt, and we can also load the feedbacks. But we don't wait for them. We just trigger the request to the backend. I will call, to make this more explicit, I will call this feedback promise. We say TanStack router, do not wait for this promise, but defer this promise. And that means that our component is rendered as soon as this promise has been resolved, the receipt is fetched, but this still can be unresolved and can still be pending, but our component will render anyway. So when we go to our receipt page, then we have feedbacks here, and as you see, the implementation is missing, but we have a component that is called feedback list, and the feedback list receives a list of feedback objects, and the feedback objects are the object that are returned from our function here. The problem here in this place here is that we have only a promise. We do not have the feedbacks here, and we can work around with that. We can go here to our function receipt page route use loader. We have actually seen this use loader data, and in this case I just want to get the feedback promise. Receipt page renders, feedback promise might be unresolved. We get an unresolved promise. We can render this whole page here where we want to display our feedbacks. We can now await for this promise using the await component from TanStack router. It's quite similar to the await component in Remix, and I think also in React router. We can specify the promise we want to await. It's the feedback promise in this case. And as a children, we pass in here a function, and the function is invoked by the await component as soon as the promise is resolved with the resolved value of the promise. And that are, in our case, the feedbacks. So we can render our feed list component here. The problem is that we have to specify what should be displayed until the feedbacks are visible. We can decide that by using a React Suspense component that we can wrap our await component, and I have a loading indicator loading feedbacks. Now when we access the route, two requests are triggered. First for the feedbacks, second for the receipt. We are waiting for the receipt. As soon as the receipt data is received, we render this route, and here we are waiting for the feedback promise that might not be resolved when the receipt data is already in the client. Let's see how this works. If I reload the page, you see this data is available immediately, but feedback take a long time, and as soon they are here, they are re-rendered. I think we can also remove this suspense here, and now we see a global loading indicator that is in the receipt layout here. I implemented also a suspense component, and it waits for the whole page. You can very fine granular express where and when to wait for something. In this case, we say we want the page, we want to wait until all data for the page is available. And in this case, we say show the most important data immediately and then wait for the not so important data. So it's very flexible, and I think this is a new strategy for working with data in React in general, with the suspense possibilities, that we can prioritize the data and can explicitly set boundaries where we want to wait for data and where not. And the TanStack router, as you have seen, is integrated with the suspense capabilities of React. And there's one thing left that I also want to show you. Let's say our receipt data also take a long time to load. I will just reload here, and I slowed down the server a little bit, and you see we have a white page because here we have now not specified something like a suspense boundary. We could do this in the root configuration. We can add a pending component that should be displayed while the data is loading. But I want to show you a different thing, and this is the idea or the possibility in TanStack router that we stay on a previous page until the next page has finished loading. Let's say when we click on a link here, you will see I click on that link, and that was already in the cache because of the preloading feature. I think I will disable our preload feature here. We have the image here, and I also add a link to the receipt page route, but I will not trigger the preload here. So if we have nothing in the cache and I go over this image, you see we stay here on this first page, on the list page, until this page has been finished loading, or at least until the important data has been loaded. Let's go to this here. We click on this. I clicked. Nothing happens, then this page is shown. And what I want to have is a visual loading indicator that is displayed here as long as it takes to load the actual receipt page. And we can implement that by wrapping this receipt card. The receipt card is the component that displays this here. We can wrap this with the MatchRoute component from TanStack query, and with the MatchRoute we can check if a specified route is currently being rendered or is being active. And in this case we want to go to the receipt page route, and we know the receipt page route has a path parameter, receipt ID, that we also have to specify. Again, the TypeScript knows what we have to specify here, or what parameters are actually required. And we not only want to see if this route, this receipts page route, is now active, but we want to know if it is pending. And that's why we're specifying pending true here. And now the child of this MatchRoute is a function that is invoked by TanStack query, and the function receives a match parameter. And this match parameter is either truthy. In this case, this route with this parameters is currently pending. It's loading, its data is loading, so that we can specify when this match is truthy, we can specify a loading indicator, and otherwise we will return our receipt card as we have already seen this. Now let's import this loading receipt card, and now if we save and I reload the page and I click on this receipt, you see we have this loading indicator until the page that we navigate to is finished. And you might have recognized, I go to this receipt here, that the feedbacks are still slower than the feedback data. And because we set a suspense boundary across or around this feedback column here, the page is recognized as ready as soon as the important data is here and the fallback component is displayed here. So it does not work for the whole page because we said this is the important part. This should be displayed as soon as possible, and this behavior is still in place when we use this MatchRoute. So I think that's all for my introduction. It's quite a long one, I think, but there are a lot of features. There are a lot of interesting features in TanStack router. I had some problem at the beginning with the type safety because there were some bugs, but I think most of them are resolved now. I think they put out 4 or 5 releases in the last days, bug fix releases. So they are actually fixing bugs very, very fast. When this works with the type safety, it's really, really great, I think. Somehow special is how I have to define my routes with this get parent route and with the add children and so on. It's something I feel a little bit strange, but I think it's needed to get this type safety. And so I think I'm willing to pay the price for that. The loader integration, I think, can be useful. Probably in a real application, you would use something like TanStack query, for example, which you can combine with the loaders. And then I think this can be a very powerful combination. The hooks that we have seen, use params, use search, use navigate, are very useful. I think you get really fast into it if you already worked with the React router, because some concepts are more or less identically, especially if you're using the newer versions of React router or even Remix, then I think that should be very similar to you. There's another feature that I have not checked out yet. There's a CLI that allows you to generate your route definitions from a file system like Next.js is doing or Remix is doing. That can be maybe interesting to save writing code ourselves. And I think in this area there will be something more in TanStack router. We will see when and what it will be, but I think there's something cooking in TanStack router. So there are a lot of interesting features. We have this integration with Suspense, which I really like. And I think maybe in my next project, I would at least think about using TanStack router instead of React router, because I also prefer this root.use hook notation over the React router use loader data, because the type safetiness is even higher in TanStack router this way than it is in React router. Anyway, both routers are very good tools. We know React router for years. It's solid, it's proved, it works, it's stable. I think TanStack router has its place in the React community, or will get its place. We will see how that works and how popular this tool will be, but at least it's something that I would recommend to try that out. Having said that, again, I will put the link to the example application in the description under this video. If you have questions or opinions, add them as comments or send me an email or whatever. Thanks for watching and happy routing.